"Mom, send me the key to the beach house." That's what my son said to me after not inviting me to his wedding. He wanted to spend his honeymoon in my house, the one I paid for with 20 years of work and sacrifice. I just smiled, hung up the phone, and 2 days later, the gift I left on his doorstep made his wife scream nonstop. My name is Maricela Vasquez, and I have lived for 66 years. That call from Raul shattered my soul, but it also opened my eyes forever. Seeing your only son, the one you raised with so much love and sacrifice, speak to you as if you were his personal employee, hurts more than any betrayal. I was born in a small town where I learned that hard work and dedication to family are the most sacred things that exist. From a young age, I worked cleaning other people's houses so that my children would never lack anything. My hands became rough from scrubbing floors, my knees were bruised from kneeling to clean bathrooms that weren't mine, but every dollar I earned, I invested in my children's future. Raul was my only son, the youngest of my 3 children. From the time he was little, he showed he was intelligent and ambitious. I worked double shifts to pay for his college studies, to buy him the clothes he needed, so he would never feel ashamed of his humble origins. I sold the jewelry my late mother had left me to pay for his business degree. I took out loans that took me years to pay off, just so he could graduate without debt. When Raul got his first job at a major company, I cried with happiness. Seeing my son dressed in a suit, carrying his briefcase, getting into his new car, filled me with pride. All the sacrifice had been worth it. He was my greatest achievement, the proof that a single mother could indeed raise her children with dignity and love. Over the years, I managed to buy a small house on the beach. It was nothing luxurious, but it had an ocean view and was my refuge. I worked like a mule for 20 years to pay for it. I would go there on weekends when exhaustion overwhelmed me, when I needed to hear the waves and remember why so much effort was worthwhile. That house represented all my work, my sacrifices, my dreams come true. 3 years ago, Raul met Claudia at his job. She came from a wealthy, educated family with last names that sounded important. From the first day he brought her home, I noticed something strange in her eyes when she looked at me. It wasn't open contempt, but something more subtle, a way of smiling that didn't reach her eyes. A way of speaking to me that sounded polite, but felt as cold as ice. At first, I thought it was nerves, that maybe she felt intimidated meeting her boyfriend's family. But over time, that coldness turned into something worse. Claudia had a very particular way of making me feel invisible in my own home. When I spoke, she would look at her phone. When I cooked, she would say she had a delicate stomach. When I told a story about when Raul was little, she would yawn discreetly. And the worst part of all was watching how my son began to change. Raul, who used to call me every day, now went weeks without giving me any news. Raul, who used to come have lunch with me on Sundays, now always had more important plans. Raul, who used to ask me for advice, now treated me as if my opinions were worthless. The first time Claudia disrespected me directly was during a family dinner. I had prepared mole, Raul's favorite dish since he was a child. I spent the whole day in the kitchen, buying the best ingredients my budget allowed. When I served the dish, Claudia tasted it and said, "It's too spicy for my taste. At my parents' house, the food is more refined." Raul said nothing. He remained silent, eating, as if his girlfriend's words hadn't wounded his own mother. That night I stayed awake wondering what I had done wrong, where I had failed as a mother. Why did the son I loved so much allow me to be treated like this in my own home? But I still had hope that things would get better. I still believed that love was stronger than any external influence. How wrong I was. The following months were like walking on broken glass. Every visit from Claudia to my house brought a new humiliation disguised as courtesy. She had a special talent for making me feel small without saying anything obviously offensive. Her comments always sounded innocent, but each word was like a needle piercing my mother's heart. "Oh, Maricela, your living room is so lovely. It's very quaint," she would say while looking at my furniture as if it were museum pieces. Furniture that I had bought with so much effort, working overtime to be able to afford it. At my parents' house, we have a professional decorator, but this has its rustic charm, she would add with that fake smile I already knew so well. Raul would remain silent, always silent. My son, who once defended everything of mine with passion, now seemed ashamed of his own history. When I told the story of how I had worked to buy his college textbooks, he would quickly change the subject. When I showed the photos of his graduation, where I appeared in my best yellow dress, he would put them away as if they were evidence of something shameful. The first time they came to my beach house together, I thought things would improve. The sea has a way of softening the hardest hearts, I thought. I prepared everything with so much care. I cleaned every corner, bought the food Raoul liked the most, and arranged fresh flowers in all the vases. Claudia arrived wearing enormous sunglasses and a hat that cost more than my weekly salary. She sat on my terrace as if she were a queen inspecting conquered territories. "It's small," was the first thing she said, "but I suppose it's fine for one person." One person. As if I were less than a whole family. "Mom worked 20 years to buy this house," Raoul said, but his voice sounded more apologetic than defensive. "How admirable," Claudia responded with that smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Although I imagine that now that you don't need it as much, you could consider selling it. Beach properties have good value, and you could invest that money in something more current. Sell it. My refuge, my sacred place, my reward for so much sacrifice." That woman wanted me to sell my house, as if it were an old piece of furniture that was no longer useful. And the worst part was Raoul's face, as if he were seriously considering the suggestion. "I don't think this is the time to talk about that," I murmured, trying to stay calm. Of course, Claudia said. "It was just an idea. It's just that sometimes older people cling to things from the past without thinking about their children's future." Older people. She referred to me as if I were a senile old woman, incapable of making decisions. I was 66 years old, not 90. I was still working, still paying my bills, still completely independent. But to her, I was just an obstacle from the past preventing her boyfriend from progressing. Family dinners turned into silent battlefields. Claudia always arrived dressed as if for a gala, in expensive pink or emerald green dresses, with jewelry that shone brighter than the lights in my dining room. I, in my best clothes, felt like a maid in my own house. She talked about elegant restaurants where they had dined, trips to Europe they were planning, important people she knew. Everything was designed to remind me how different our worlds were. "Wouldn't it be nice to have a bigger house for when we have children?" she would say to Raoul while glancing at me. "A place where the kids can grow up with more opportunities." More opportunities. As if I had limited my son's opportunities. As if all my sacrifice had been insufficient. Raoul would nod without looking me in the eye. My son, who used to consult me even to buy shoes, now planned his future as if I didn't exist. As if my opinion, my experience, my mother's love had no value at all. One day, they arrived at my house, and Claudia was wearing an engagement ring that shone like a star. She showed it to everyone except me. When I finally saw it, I couldn't help but ask when the wedding would be. "It will be something intimate," Raoul said, avoiding my gaze. Just close family. And I, his mother, the woman who gave birth to him, who raised him alone, who sacrificed 20 years for him, apparently was not close family. The silence that followed was so heavy it could have been cut with a knife. "I'm sure you'll understand, Maricela," Claudia said in that soft voice she used to insult. "We want something very select, very elegant. You know how these things are among our social class." Our social class. Not Raoul's social class, who had grown up eating beans and rice while I worked to support him. Our social class, as if he had always belonged to that world of privilege that I could never give him, but that he now embraced, denying his entire past. That night, after they left, I sat in my kitchen and cried like I hadn't cried since my mother's death. It wasn't just pain. It was a mixture of anger, disappointment, and a sadness so deep that my chest physically ached. Was this what I had worked so hard for? To raise a son who was ashamed of me? For a spoiled girl to come into my house and treat me like I was less than nothing? But I still had hope. I still believed that on the wedding day, Raoul would remember who had always been there for him. That he would call me, crying, apologizing, asking me to be by his side on the most important day of his life. How foolish I was. The wedding approached like a storm I saw coming but couldn't stop. Raoul came home less and less, and when he did, he seemed like a stranger visiting out of courtesy. His conversations with me were limited to basic questions about my health and comments about the weather. My son, who used to tell me even his dreams, was now a polite stranger who treated me like a distant neighbor. 2 weeks before the wedding, I decided to try one last conversation with him. I prepared his favorite food, sweet tamales like the ones I made when he was little and came home hungry from school. The same tamales he asked for every birthday that he proudly took to school parties to share with his friends. When he arrived that afternoon, he came alone. It had been months since I had seen him without Claudia attached to his arm, like an elegant and cold shadow. I thought it was my chance, my moment to get my son back. "It smells delicious, Mom," he said, and for a second he was the boy I remembered. We sat down to eat in silence. I waited for him to start talking, to tell me something about the wedding, to explain why he had made such a painful decision. But he ate mechanically, looking at his phone every few minutes. "Raoul," I finally said, "we need to talk about the wedding." He tensed immediately. He put his fork down on the plate and sighed as if I were one more problem to solve in his busy day. "Mom, we already talked about this. It's a small, very private ceremony. Claudia wants something intimate." "And what am I?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Am I not intimate? Am I not important in your life?" "That's not it," he said, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. It's complicated. Claudia's family is very particular. They have very specific traditions. Traditions that didn't include me. Traditions that erased my existence from my son's life, as if I were a stain on his history. As if 26 years of love, sacrifice, and dedication were worthless against the social demands of a capricious girl. "Do you know what tradition I have?" I said, my voice trembling but firm. "The tradition of having worked 2 jobs to pay for your college. The tradition of having sold everything I owned so you could have what I never had. The tradition of having loved you unconditionally every day of your life." Raoul shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time in months, he looked me directly in the eyes, and what I saw there broke my heart. It wasn't filial love. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't even guilt. It was annoyance. My son saw me as a problem, as an emotional burden that complicated his new perfect life. "Mom, don't be dramatic," he said with that new voice he had developed, the one that sounded exactly like Claudia's. "You know I love you, but my life is different now. I have other responsibilities, other commitments. As if I were an optional commitment he could be free of when it was convenient. As if the bond between a mother and son was something that could be disconnected when it was no longer socially useful. "Are you ashamed of me?" I asked him directly. The silence that followed was the clearest answer I could have received. Raoul didn't say no. He wasn't outraged by the question. He didn't assure me that I was crazy for thinking that. He just stayed quiet, looking at his hands, searching for the right words to hurt me in the softest way possible. "It's not that, Mom," he finally said. "It's just that your way of being, your way of talking, it's very different from the people I'm around now. Claudia and her family are very sophisticated. They have very high expectations. Expectations that I didn't meet. My way of being, forged by years of honest work and unconditional love, was not sophisticated enough for my son's new world. My way of talking, direct and sincere, did not fit with the elegant hypocrisy of his new social class. "I understand," I said, "perfectly." He left that night with a relieved smile, as if he had managed to solve an annoying problem. He kissed my cheek like one kisses a distant aunt and told me he would call me after the honeymoon. After the honeymoon. He wasn't even going to call me to tell me how his wedding had been. The next few days passed in a painful haze. I continued with my daily routine, working, cleaning, cooking. But everything felt empty. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped, hoping it was Raoul changing his mind, asking for forgiveness, inviting me to his wedding. But it was never him. The day of the wedding dawned, sunny and beautiful. I knew the exact time of the ceremony because I had heard Claudia talk about it during one of her visits. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my son would be getting married, and I would be at home, alone, as if I were an unimportant stranger in his life. I dressed in my best green suit, the one I had bought for special occasions. I did my hair carefully, put on a little makeup. I didn't know why I was doing it. Maybe it was an act of resistance, a way to maintain my dignity even if no one saw me. I sat in my living room at 5 o'clock sharp and imagined my son at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, promising eternal love to the woman who had erased me from his life. I cried. I cried for the boy he had been, for the man he had become, for the mother who was no longer welcome in his world. I cried for all the dreams I had had about that day, for all the times I had imagined dancing at my son's wedding, proud and happy to see that he had found love. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake thinking about everything I had done wrong, about all the moments where I could have acted differently. Had I been too affectionate? Too present? Had I raised an ungrateful son? Or had I simply lost to a woman more intelligent and manipulative than me? The next day, early in the morning, my phone rang. It was Raoul. My heart raced, thinking that maybe he had remembered the love he had for me, that maybe he wanted to apologize and start over. "Hi, Mom," he said cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. "How are you?" "Fine," I lied. "How was the wedding?" "Perfect. Everything went exactly as Claudia wanted. It was very elegant, very beautiful. You would have liked it. I would have liked it. As if I had chosen not to be there. As if my absence had been my decision and not a deliberate and cruel exclusion." "I'm glad to hear that," I said, though it hurt to even breathe. "Hey, Mom," he continued in that casual voice he used for asking favors. "We're packing for the honeymoon, and I had a great idea." My heart sank. I knew something bad was coming, but I couldn't imagine to what extent. "What's your idea?" I asked. "Well, you know I've always loved your beach house. Claudia saw it, and, although she says it's small, she thinks it could be romantic for a honeymoon. What do you think about lending us the keys for 2 weeks?" The world stopped. My son, who hadn't invited me to his wedding, who had excluded me from the most important day of his life, who had allowed his wife to humiliate me for years, was now asking me to lend them my house to celebrate a marriage to which I had not been welcome, my beach house, my refuge. My sacred place where I went to heal the wounds he himself had caused me. He wanted me to give it to him to celebrate their love while I was left alone with my pain. "Did you hear me, Mom?" he asked when he saw I wasn't responding. "I heard you perfectly," I said with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "So, what do you say? Will you lend us the keys?" That question changed something inside me forever. In that moment, the mother I had been died, and a new woman was born. A woman who had learned, in the most painful way possible, that unconditional love is sometimes not returned, and that one's own dignity is worth more than maintaining relationships that destroy your soul. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll call you back." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in months, I smiled. After hanging up the phone, I sat in my kitchen for hours. It wasn't sadness I felt now. It was something different. Something forming inside me like a silent storm. It was clarity. For the first time in years, I saw the situation exactly as it was, without the filter of a mother's blind love that had prevented me from recognizing reality. My son didn't respect me. His wife despised me. And now, after excluding me from the most important moment of their lives, he had the audacity to ask me to give them my house to celebrate a love built on my humiliation. I got up from the table and walked to my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept important documents and took out the deed to my beach house. I read it line by line, remembering every payment I had made, every sacrifice it had meant, every monthly installment. 20 years of my life were on that paper. 20 years of working Saturdays and Sundays, of eating rice and beans to save money, of denying myself small luxuries to get something that was completely mine. That house was more than just property. It was my independence, my security, my proof that a single woman could get ahead with dignity. And now my son wanted me to lend it to the woman who had systematically planned to erase me from his life. I called my sister Gilda that afternoon. Gilda had always been more direct than me, less tolerant of disrespect. For years she had tried to warn me about Raoul's behavior, but I always defended my son, always found excuses to justify his actions. "Maricela," she said as soon as I told her what had happened, "that boy is completely lost, and you have been too good to him." "He's my son, Gilda," I said, though it no longer sounded as convincing as before. "Being your son doesn't give him the right to treat you like a servant. She replied with that firmness that had always characterized her. You know what I would do in your place. What? I would teach him a lesson he would never forget. That boy needs to remember where he comes from and who put him where he is. I hung up with Gilda, but her words stayed with me. A lesson he would never forget. But what kind of lesson? How do you teach humility to someone who has completely forgotten their roots? That night, as I prepared dinner for one, I had an idea. It was simple, elegant, and completely fair. If Raoul wanted my house for his honeymoon, he was going to have it, but not in the way he expected. The next day, early in the morning, I drove to my beach house. I hadn't been there in a month, since the last time I had gone to cry and think in peace. I walked through each room, remembering all the happy moments I had spent there. The weekends reading on the terrace, the dinners watching the sunset, the nights listening to the waves as I planned the future. I sat on the terrace and took out my phone. It was time to call Raoul. Hi, Mom, he answered with that cheerful voice he used when he expected good news. Hello, son, I said with all the tranquility in the world. I've thought about what you asked me. And what did you decide? You can have the keys to the house. I heard his shout of joy on the other end of the line. Mom, you're the best. Claudia is going to be so happy. Thank you so much. You're welcome, I said. But I have one condition. Of course, tell me. I need you to come pick up the keys in person. Today. And I want to get to know Claudia better as your wife. Invite me to dinner tonight to celebrate. There was a pause. I knew he was calculating whether it was worth putting up with a dinner with me in exchange for 2 free weeks at the beach. Okay, he finally said. We'll be there at 8. Perfect. I'll be waiting for you. After hanging up, I drove back to the city. I had a lot to do and very little time to do it. My first stop was the bank. I needed to make an important transfer. My second stop was at a fancy gift shop in the most exclusive mall in the city. I spent an hour choosing the perfect box. It had to be elegant, the kind Claudia would approve of. I finally found a beautiful purple velvet box with a golden bow. It cost more than I spent on food in a week, but it was worth every penny. Back home, I prepared everything with the same care I had always put into family dinners. I set out my best tablecloth, took out the good china I reserved for special occasions. I lit candles. If this was going to be the last dinner I shared with my son as the mother I had been until that day, I wanted it to be memorable. At 8 o'clock sharp, they arrived. Raoul was smiling, obviously excited about getting the house for free. Claudia arrived in a pink dress that cost more than my monthly rent and that fake smile I knew so well. Maricela, she said in that soft voice she used to insult. You look so lovely, and your house has such a homey smell. Homey. An elegant way of saying my food smelled cheap and simple compared to the expensive restaurants where she was used to dining. Thank you, I said with a genuine smile. I hope you enjoy the dinner. During the meal, Claudia spoke at length about the wedding. She described every detail with luxurious precision. The flowers that had cost $2,000, the dress imported from France, the band they had brought in specially from the capital, the important guests who had attended. It was exactly as I dreamed of since I was a girl, she said, looking directly at me. A perfect wedding, without any element that clashed with the elegance of the event. Without any element that clashed, like me. Like the working mother who had raised the groom, like the woman who had sacrificed everything to make that day possible. I'm so glad it was perfect, I told her, with absolute sincerity. Raoul seemed uncomfortable with the conversation, but he said nothing to defend me, as always. After dinner, while we were having coffee, I took out the elegant purple box I had prepared. Before I give you the keys, I said, I want to give you a wedding gift. Claudia's eyes lit up when she saw the expensive box. I knew she was calculating how much it had cost, wondering what jewel or valuable gift it might contain. You didn't have to, Mom, Raoul said, but he looked curious. I insist, I said, placing the box on the table. Open it, Claudia. Claudia took the box with eager hands. She opened it slowly, with the expectant smile of someone hoping to receive something valuable. But when she saw the contents, her face changed completely. Inside the elegant box, wrapped in tissue paper, were the keys to my beach house. Just the keys, nothing more. The The keys, Claudia said in a confused voice. Just the keys. Just the keys, I confirmed with a serene smile. The keys to my house, which you will be able to use for 2 weeks because I am allowing you to. The keys to the house that I bought with my work and my sacrifice. The keys that I am lending you because, despite everything, Raoul is still my son. The silence at the table was so thick you could cut it. Claudia stared at the keys as if they were poisonous snakes. Raoul looked at me, not understanding exactly what had happened, but knowing that something had changed. I don't understand the point of this, Claudia said in a tense voice. The point, I said, standing up from the table, is to remind you that everything you have, everything you enjoy, everything that allows you to live as you do, comes from the sacrifice of people like me. People who worked honestly so that you could have comfortable lives. Claudia stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. You're right, I told her with perfect calm. You don't have to listen to anything. You can leave whenever you want. But if you want to use my house, you will take those keys with the clear understanding that they are a gift from the woman you have been despising for years. Mom, Raoul finally intervened. I think you're exaggerating. Exaggerating? I asked, looking him directly in the eyes. Am I exaggerating when I say you didn't invite me to your wedding? Am I exaggerating when I say your wife has disrespected me in my own home for years? Am I exaggerating when I say you talk to me as if I were an employee who owes you favors? Raoul didn't answer. He couldn't answer because every word I had said was the absolute truth. Take the keys, I told them. Enjoy your honeymoon. But every time you open that door, every time you sit on that terrace, every time you see the sea from that house, remember who paid for it and why she is lending it to you. Claudia took the keys with hands trembling with rage. Let's go, she said. Oh, and when you get back from your honeymoon, I expect you to bring the keys back to me personally. I have something else to tell you. They left without saying goodbye. I heard the car drive away and stood in my living room, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. The days following that dinner were the quietest I had had in months. I received no calls from Raoul, no messages, no attempts at contact. It was as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth, taking with him all the tension and pain I had been carrying for so long. I woke up that first morning feeling different. Lighter, but also stronger. I made my coffee as usual, but instead of sitting down to think about the problems with my son, I focused on thinking about myself. When was the last time I had done something just for my own pleasure? When was the last time I had made a decision without first considering how it would affect Raoul? I decided to go shopping. Not for my house, not to prepare a dinner for guests, but for me. I bought myself a beautiful yellow dress that made me feel elegant, a pair of comfortable shoes for walking, and a book I had wanted to read for months. I spent money on myself without feeling guilty for the first time in years. That afternoon, my sister Gilda called me. Has Raoul called you yet? She asked directly. No, I replied, and I don't expect him to. How do you feel? It was a simple question, but it took me several seconds to answer. How did I feel? Sad? Angry? Guilty? I feel at peace, I finally said, surprising myself with the answer. Good, Gilda said with satisfaction. It was time you realized what you were worth. 5 days passed before I heard anything from them. It wasn't Raoul who called me, but Claudia. Her voice sounded different, less self-assured, less condescending. Hello, Maricela, she said, and I noticed immediately that she had stopped calling me by my name with that dismissive intonation she always used. Hello, Claudia, I replied with perfect tranquility. We're at the beach house, she continued. I wanted to thank you for lending it to us. To thank me? It was the first time in 3 years that woman had thanked me for anything. You're welcome, I said. Are you enjoying your honeymoon? Yes, very much, she replied, but there was something in her voice that didn't sound completely happy. The house it's really beautiful. The ocean view is spectacular. I'm glad to hear that, I said, waiting to see where the conversation was going. Maricela, she continued after a pause, can we talk when we get back? Raoul and I have been talking a lot these days, and I think there are things we need to clear up. Things we need to clear up. It was interesting how 2 weeks in my house, breathing the air I breathed, sleeping in the bed I had bought, using the dishes I had chosen, had begun to change her perspective. "Of course," I told her. "When you get back, we can talk." I hung up with a smile. I knew exactly what had happened. Claudia had been living in my house, using my things, enjoying the result of my work, and for the first time, she had had to face the reality of who I was and what I had accomplished. It was easy to despise someone when you only saw them as an obstacle in your path. It was harder to despise them when you were literally living in the fruit of their labor. During those 2 weeks, I dedicated myself to doing things I had been putting off for years. I reorganized my entire house, gave away clothes I no longer wore, and painted the living room a soft green color that I had always liked, but had never dared to use because I thought Raoul wouldn't like it. I also started going out more. I accepted an invitation from my neighbor Aline to go dancing at a club for people our age. It had been more than 10 years since I had danced, and I discovered that I still remembered how to move my feet to the rhythm of the music. I laughed more that night than in all the previous months combined. "You look radiant," Aline told me as we were heading home, "as if a weight has been lifted from your shoulders." "That's exactly how I feel," I replied. The day they returned from their honeymoon, Raoul called me early in the morning. "Hi, Mom," he said, and his voice sounded different, less confident, less authoritarian. "Hello, son?" I replied. "Can we come see you this afternoon? Claudia and I want to talk to you." "Of course. What time? At 6, is that okay?" "Perfect." I spent the day mentally preparing for what was coming. I didn't know exactly what to expect from this conversation, but I knew it would be important. I put on my new yellow dress, did my hair, and put on a little makeup. I wanted to look good, not to impress them, but for myself. They arrived on time. Raoul looked more humble than I had seen him in years. And Claudia. Claudia looked uncomfortable, but not with that haughty discomfort from before. She looked like someone who had been doing a lot of reflecting and didn't like the conclusions she had reached. "Hi, Mom," Raoul said, and he gave me a warmer hug than I had received from him in months. "Hello, Maricela," Claudia said, and I noticed she looked me in the eyes when she spoke, something she had rarely done before. We sat in the living room. There was a tense silence, as if we all knew something important was about to happen, but no one knew exactly how to begin. Finally, it was Claudia who spoke first. "Maricela," she began, and her voice trembled slightly. "I want to apologize." The words hung in the air. In 3 years, I had never heard that woman apologize for anything. "Apologize for what?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well why. "For everything," she said, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. "For how I've treated you, for the things I've said, for not inviting you to the wedding." I looked at Raoul. He had his head down, looking at his hands. "And you?" I asked him. "Do you have something to say too?" Raoul lifted his head and looked at me with eyes full of pain. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, "I've been the worst son in the world." "No," I said firmly. "You haven't been the worst son in the world. You've been a confused son who forgot his values, but that can be changed." "These days in your house," he continued, "we were talking a lot. Claudia made me see things I didn't want to recognize. How I had been treating you. How I had allowed you to be treated." I looked at Claudia in surprise. "You made him see that?" Claudia nodded, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Being in your house changed my perspective," she said. "Seeing everything you had achieved, everything you had built with your work, reading the books you had on the shelves, seeing the pictures of Raoul when he was little, truly understanding who you were and what you had sacrificed for him. We found a box with all my college report cards," Raoul added, "all saved so carefully, and the pictures from my graduation where you looked so proud. And I realized I had been trying to erase the person who loved me most in the world." "I also found the payment receipts for the house," Claudia said. 20 years of payments, 20 years working to have something of your own. And I realized that I, who had never worked a day in my life, had been despising a woman who had achieved more with her effort than I had with all my privileges. It was strange to hear Claudia speak with such honesty. It was as if the 2 weeks in my house had stripped her of all the masks she usually wore. "I never had to sacrifice anything," she continued. "My parents gave me everything. I never valued work. because I never had to work. But being in your house, using the things you had bought with so much effort, made me understand what sacrifice really meant. And it made me understand, Raoul added, that I had traded the strongest woman I know for the approval of people who will never love me the way you do. My son's words went straight to my heart. Not because they were what I wanted to hear, but because they sounded completely sincere. "What do you want from me now?" I asked them. "We want a chance," Raoul said, "a chance to start over, to do things right. We want you to know," Claudia added, "that we understand if you can't forgive us. We understand if you need time, but we hope you'll give us a chance to show you that we can change." I was quiet for several minutes, thinking. It was tempting to say yes immediately, to hug them and pretend nothing had happened. But I had learned something important in those weeks. That true love sometimes requires clear boundaries. "I'm going to be honest with you," I finally told them. "You hurt me deeply, and I can't just forget that because you feel bad now." They both nodded, waiting for what came next. "But," I continued, "I can forgive, and I can give you a chance, but it will be on my terms." "Tell us what they are," Raoul said immediately. "First," I said, looking at Claudia, "I want a public apology. I want you to call your family and explain why you excluded me from the wedding. I want you to admit it was unfair and cruel." Claudia swallowed hard but nodded. "Second," I continued, looking at Raoul, "I want you to come have dinner with me every Sunday for the next 6 months. Just you and me. No phone, no distractions. I want to rebuild the relationship we had." "Done," he said without hesitation. "And third," I looked at them both, "the next time you disrespect me, in any way, it will be the last time you see me. There will be no second chances after this one." "Understood," they said in unison. I stood up and hugged them both. "Now," I said, "do you want to stay for dinner?" For the first time in years, Raoul's smile was completely genuine. "I'd love that, Mom." The following months were like learning to walk again after a serious injury. We all knew that things had changed irreversibly, but no one was sure exactly what this new version of our family would look like. It was uncharted territory for all of us. The first Sunday Raoul came for dinner alone was strange. It had been so long since we had shared a meal without Claudia's intimidating presence that we had almost forgotten how to talk to each other. For the first few minutes, we talked about superficial things, the weather, his job, my health, but gradually, as the tension dissipated, fragments of the son I remembered began to emerge. "Do you remember?" he asked me while we ate the chicken mole that had been his favorite since childhood, "when you used to take me to the beach on Sundays after church?" "Of course I remember," I replied. "You liked to look for seashells and pretend they were pirate treasure. And you always pretended they were real," he said with a nostalgic smile. "You told me if I found enough, we could buy a boat and be pirates together." "I still have some of those shells," I told him. "I kept them in a box in my closet." He was quiet for a moment, chewing slowly. "Why did you keep them?" he asked. "Because they were gifts of love," I answered simply. "You never throw away gifts of love." I saw his eyes fill with tears. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, "how could you forgive me?" It was a question I had asked myself many times during the preceding weeks. "Because you are my son," I said, "and because I saw that your regret was real. But mostly because I learned that holding a grudge hurt me more than it hurt you." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he murmured. "Maybe not," I said honestly, "but I deserve the peace that comes with forgiving." Over the next few weeks, our Sunday dinners turned into impromptu therapy sessions. Raoul told me about the pressure he had felt entering Claudia's world, about how he had started to see his past as something shameful instead of something that had shaped him. I told him about the loneliness I had felt, about the nights I had cried wondering what I had done wrong as a mother. "Claudia's family never fully accepted me," he confessed one afternoon. "They always saw me as the poor boy who had made his way into their social circle. And instead of defending myself and where I came from, I tried to change to fit in." "And did it work?" I asked. "No," he admitted. "It never worked. There was always something that wasn't right. My way of speaking, my cultural references, my tastes. I became someone I didn't recognize, and still, I was never enough for them." "And what happened with Claudia in all this?" Raoul sighed deeply. "Claudia changed a lot after being at your house," he said. I think for the first time in her life, she understood what hard work and sacrifice meant. And she realized she had been acting exactly like her parents, looking down on people who had achieved things without having privileges. It was true. Claudia had changed noticeably since her return. The few times I had seen her, she behaved completely differently. More humble, more respectful, more aware of her words and actions. One afternoon, about a month after that first conversation, Claudia called to ask if she could come see me alone. Of course, I said, curious to know what she had to say. She arrived that afternoon dressed much more simply than usual. Jeans and a simple white blouse, without the ostentatious jewelry she normally wore. She looked normal, like a normal person, not like the unattainable princess she had been for years. "Maricela," she said after sitting down, "I want to tell you something I haven't even told Raoul." "I'm listening," I said. "While we were at your house," she began, "I spent a lot of time thinking about my own life, about how I was raised, about what my parents taught me about the value of people." She paused, as if it was hard for her to continue. "My parents taught me that people are worth what they have, not who they are," she continued. "They taught me that people who work with their hands are inferior to people who work with their minds. They taught me that inherited money is worth more than earned money." "And you believe that?" I said without judging her. "I believed it because I had never met anyone who proved me wrong," she replied, "until I met you." Her honesty surprised me. "What was it that made you change your mind?" I asked. "Many small things," she said. "But there was one specific moment. I was in your kitchen, making coffee with the coffee maker you have there, and I saw a note stuck to the refrigerator. It was a list of things you wanted to buy for the house, with the prices next to each item. I remembered that list. I had made it months earlier, calculating how much money I would need to save to make some improvements to the house. I saw that you had written, 'New lamp for the living room, $45, and next to it you had written, 'Work 3 extra shifts,'" Claudia continued. "And I realized that, for you, that lamp represented 3 additional days of work, 3 days of waking up early, of getting more tired, of sacrificing your free time. That's how it works when you don't have extra money," I said simply. "Exactly," she said, "and I had never had to think like that. For me, $45 was what I spent on a coffee without a second thought. But for you, it was 3 extra days of work. And that made you reflect?" "It made me understand that you valued things in a way I had never learned," she replied. "That every object in your house had a story of effort behind it. And I realized I had been looking down on someone who had achieved more with fewer resources than I had had in my entire life." It was a deep and honest conversation. For the first time, I felt like I was getting to know the real Claudia, not the artificial version she had been playing for years. "What do you want to do with this new perspective?" I asked her. "I want to change," she said with determination. "I want to be a better person, and I want you to teach me." "Teach you what?" "To value things. To work for what I want. To not take anything for granted." It was a strange but genuine request. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because learning to value things also means learning to live without some of them." "I'm sure," she replied without hesitation. Over the following weeks, Claudia began to visit me regularly. Not for the Sunday dinners with Raoul, which remained our private time, but for what we started calling real-life lessons. I taught her to cook. Not elaborate dishes, but simple, nutritious meals that didn't cost a fortune. I taught her how to budget, to compare prices at the supermarket, to repair things instead of immediately replacing them. "Why are you fixing this chair instead of buying a new one?" she asked one day, as I was sanding and painting a wooden chair that was years old. "Because this chair has a good frame," I explained. "It just needs a little care to look like new. Why spend $100 on a new chair when I can make this one look perfect for $5 of paint?" "I had never thought of that," she admitted. "Besides," I added, "this chair has a history. It was the first chair I bought when I moved into this house. It's been with me for 15 years. Throwing it away would be like throwing away a piece of my history." I saw how she processed this information, how she began to understand that things could have value beyond their monetary price. The biggest change came when Claudia decided to look for a job. She had never worked in her life, but she wanted to experience what it meant to earn her own money. My parents are furious, she told me one afternoon. They say they don't understand why I want to lower myself to work when I don't need to. And what did you tell them? That I wanted to understand what my husband and my mother-in-law had experienced their whole lives, she replied. That I wanted to be a complete person, not just an expensive decoration in someone else's life. She got a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was honest and gave her her first paycheck earned through her own effort. Maricela, she shouted excitedly the day she received her first payment. Look, she showed me her check, as if it were a Nobel Prize. How does it feel? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the expression on her face. It feels incredible, she said. It feels like I'm finally a real person. That night, Claudia took Raúl to dinner with her first paycheck. Not to an expensive restaurant as they had always done, but to a simple taqueria where the food was delicious and the prices were fair. I've never seen Claudia so happy, Raúl told me the following Sunday. It was like she had discovered a superpower she didn't know she had. And how do you feel about all these changes? I asked him. I feel like I finally have a real wife, he replied. Not a princess who needs to be taken care of, but a partner who can face life with me. It was beautiful to see how their relationship was transforming. It was no longer Raúl desperately trying to impress an unattainable woman, but two adults building a life together based on real values. But the most significant change came 3 months later, when Claudia did something completely unexpected. The most significant change came when Claudia organized a second wedding. They didn't tell me directly. I found out by chance when I overheard Raúl talking on the phone with someone about the preparations for the ceremony. At first, I felt a familiar pang of pain. Another wedding I wouldn't be invited to? Had this whole time of reconciliation been just an elaborate act? But I decided not to jump to conclusions. I had learned to give them the benefit of the doubt, at least until I had all the information. It was Claudia who came to talk to me 2 days later. Maricela, she said with a seriousness I hadn't seen in her before. I need to ask you something very important. Tell me, I replied, mentally preparing myself for anything. Raúl and I want to get married again, she began. But this time we want to do it right. We want a real wedding, with the people who really matter in our lives. My heart started to beat faster, but I kept my expression neutral. And what does that have to do with me? I asked. We want you to be the one to give me away to Raúl, she said, and her voice broke slightly as she said the words. I was speechless. In all the weddings I had seen in my life, it was always the father of the bride who gave her away to the groom. It was an ancient, symbolic, sacred tradition. I don't understand, I finally said. My parents won't be at this wedding, Claudia explained. When I told them I wanted a simple ceremony, that I wanted to invite you, that I wanted it to be about real love and not about showing social status, they refused to participate. They refused? I asked, surprised. They said they wouldn't lower themselves to attend a wedding in a public garden with working-class people, she replied bitterly. They said if I wanted to get married like a peasant, I could do it without them. It was cruel, but not entirely surprising given Claudia's family. And how do you feel about that? I asked. It hurts, she admitted, but it also frees me. It frees me from trying to be someone I'm not to win their approval. And why do you want me to be the one to give you away? Claudia was quiet for a moment, as if carefully choosing her words. Because you are the person who has fought the most for love in this family, she finally said. Because you are the one who taught me what real commitment means. And because I want you to know that I now understand the value of what you have always given. Tears started to run down my cheeks, uncontrollably. Besides, she added with a shy smile, technically, you are giving your son to me, not me to him. You are giving me the greatest gift you have ever had, your son. And I want to promise you publicly that I will take care of him as you have taken care of him his whole life. It was such a beautiful, meaningful gesture that I didn't know what to say. Is Raúl okay with this? I asked. It was his idea, she replied. He said he wanted the most important person in his life to be the one to give us her blessing. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about everything that had happened, about the emotional journey we had taken as a family, about how far we had come from that horrible phone call months ago. The wedding was planned to be small but meaningful. 20 people in total, some close friends of Raoul, my sisters, some of Claudia's co-workers, and the few relatives who had supported her decision to change her life. Claudia chose a simple ivory-colored dress, which she had bought with her own money from work. It wasn't a designer dress that cost thousands of dollars, but something beautiful and elegant that she could afford with her receptionist's salary. "Do you like it?" she asked, when she tried it on for me to see. "You look beautiful," I said sincerely. "But more than that, you look like yourself." "It's the first time in my life I felt like myself," she replied. The ceremony was held in a small public garden with a view of the sea. Claudia had insisted it be near the ocean because she wanted it to remind me of my beach house, the place where her transformation had begun. On the day of the wedding, I got up early and dressed with special care. I chose a green dress I had bought especially for the occasion, did my hair, and put on light makeup. I wanted to look good, not just for the ceremony, but because I knew that day would be one of the most important of my life. When I arrived at the garden, Claudia was already there, nervous but radiant. She came over and hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you," I replied, "for taking that chance and doing something beautiful with it." The ceremony was simple but emotional. The officiant spoke about true love, the importance of family, the value of forgiveness and second chances. When it was time for the bride to be given away, I stood up. Claudia took my arm, and we walked together to where Raoul was waiting. My son looked more handsome than I had ever seen him, but more than that, he looked at peace. He looked like the man I had always hoped he would be. When we reached the altar, the officiant said the traditional words. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" "I do," I replied in a clear, strong voice. "And at the same time, I give my son to form a new family, based on love, respect, and true values." I placed Claudia's hand in Raoul's hand and looked at them both. "Take care of each other," I said. "Always respect each other. And remember that true love is not just a feeling, but a decision you make every day." They both had tears in their eyes as they nodded. The ceremony continued with vows they had written themselves. Raoul promised never again to be ashamed of his roots, never again to allow anyone to disrespect his family, and to be the husband Claudia deserved. Claudia promised to continue growing as a person, to value what they had, and to love Raoul exactly as he was, without trying to change him to fit into someone else's mold. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was different from any display of affection I had seen from them before. It was genuine, full of real love, not a social performance. During the reception, which consisted of a simple meal in the same garden, Raoul approached me. "Mom," he said, "I want you to know that this is the happiest day of my life. Not because of the wedding itself, but because I finally feel like I have a real family." "You always had a real family," I replied. "You just lost sight of what that meant." "I'll never lose sight of it again," he promised. That evening, for the first time, I sat on my terrace with a cup of tea and reflected on everything that had happened. From that painful phone call to this beautiful day, we had traveled a path none of us had anticipated. I had learned that sometimes the greatest love you can give is to set clear boundaries, that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing not to carry the weight of resentment, and that people can truly change when they are willing to do the hard work of examining their own actions and values. But more than anything, I had gotten my son back. Not the perfect son I had idealized, but the real son, with flaws and virtues, who had learned from his mistakes and was committed to being better. The months following the second wedding were like living in a completely new world. The transformation hadn't just been Claudia's and Raoul's. I had changed too. I was no longer the mother who sacrificed everything without question, who accepted any treatment just to keep the peace. I had learned to value myself, to set boundaries, and oddly enough, this had made my relationship stronger, not weaker. Raoul religiously kept our Sunday dinner appointments. Every week he arrived promptly at 6 o'clock in the evening, and for those hours, we were just mother and son, rebuilding the trust that had been lost. We talked about everything: his work, his dreams, his fears, the mistakes he had made, and how he was working to be a better person. You know what's strangest? He told me one Sunday over the stewed chicken that had been his childhood favorite. "Now that I have a real relationship with you, I feel more confident in every aspect of my life. What do you mean? I asked. Before, when I was trying to hide where I came from, I always felt like an imposter, he explained, as if at any moment someone would discover that I didn't really belong in that elegant world. But now that I embrace my story, that I speak with pride about my mother who worked so hard to raise me, I feel authentic. Authenticity always brings more security than performance, I said. Exactly. And at work, my colleagues respect me more now that they know my real story. They used to think I was just another privileged kid. Now they know I got there on my own merit, with sacrifice and effort. It was true. Raoul had started to speak openly about his humble origins, about how his single mother had raised him, about the sacrifices they had made together to get where they were. And far from harming him professionally, this had earned him the genuine respect of his peers and superiors. Claudia also continued her transformation. After several months as a receptionist, she had been promoted to administrative assistant. Her boss had noticed her dedication, her punctuality, and her willingness to learn new things. For the first time in her life, she was building a reputation based on her own merit. "My old friends don't understand what happened to me," she told me one afternoon when she came to visit. "They say I've become common, that I've lost my class." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked. "At first, it hurt," she admitted. "But then I realized that those were never really my friends. They were people who were with me because I met a certain social standard, not because they really knew or valued me as a person." "And have you made new friends?" "Yes," she said with a genuine smile. "At work, at the gym I go to now, in the cooking class I'm taking. They're real people with real problems and real joys. The conversations are much more interesting when they're not just about who bought what or where they went on vacation." It was beautiful to see how she had blossomed. The cold, calculating woman I had known years ago had been replaced by someone warm, genuine, and surprisingly funny. When she laughed now, the laughter reached her eyes. When she spoke, her words had substance. One day, about 6 months after the second wedding, Claudia came to my house with an unexpected proposal. "Maricela," she said with a seriousness that alarmed me, "I want to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured to say yes." "Tell me," I replied, intrigued. "Raoul and I have been talking about buying a house," she began. "We've been saving, and with our 2 salaries, we can now afford the down payment for something small but nice." "That sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "But we don't want to buy just any house," she continued. "We want to buy your beach house." I was completely stunned. Of all the things I could have expected her to say, that was not even remotely on my list. "My beach house?" I repeated. "We know what that house means to you," she said quickly. "We know all the work you put into it, everything you sacrificed to get it. That's why we want to buy it from you at the fair market price, not ask for it as a favor." "But why that house specifically?" I asked. "Because it's where my transformation began," she replied, her eyes shining. "It's where I learned to value what really matters. It's where Raoul and I had the most honest conversations of our relationship. That house has a special meaning for us, and we want to preserve that meaning. Besides," she added, "we want you to continue to have access to it whenever you want. We want you to know that you will always have a place to go to rest, to reflect, to be at peace." It was an emotional and generous proposal, but it also put me in a difficult position. "I need time to think about it," I told them. "Of course," Claudia replied. "Take all the time you need." For the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about their proposal. That house had been my refuge for so long, my sacred place where I went to heal and to think. Was I ready to give that up? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the house had served its purpose for me. It had given me peace when I needed it, provided me a place to process my emotions during the most difficult times, and had been the stage where my family had begun to heal. Now, that house could serve an even more beautiful purpose, to be the home where my son and his wife would build their new life together, where perhaps they would raise my future grandchildren, where they would continue to grow as people and as a couple. Furthermore, the money from the sale would give me financial security I had never had. I could save for my retirement, maybe travel a little, or simply have the peace of mind of knowing I wouldn't have to worry about money in my golden years. 3 weeks later, I called them to give them my answer. "I've decided to sell you the house," I said when they came for dinner. They both shouted with joy and hugged me. But, I continued, I have some conditions. Anything you want, they said in unison. First condition, I want to be part of the decorating process. That house has a history, and I want to make sure you both understand and respect that history. Absolutely, said Claudia. Second condition, I want you to promise that if you ever decide to sell the house, you'll give me the first option to buy it back. Promised, said Raoul. And third condition, I added with a smile, I want you to invite me to spend long weekends there, at least once a month. That's not even a condition, exclaimed Claudia. That's exactly what we were hoping for. The selling process was emotional but beautiful. As I packed my personal belongings from the house, Claudia and Raoul helped me, and every object sparked a story, a memory that I shared with them. I found this shell the first day I came here after buying the house. I told them as I wrapped a particularly beautiful conch. I was so happy to have a place of my own by the sea that I cried from pure joy. I want you to take it, Claudia said. But I also want you to tell that story to my children when I have them, so they know about the grandmother who worked so hard to get this house. Her words went straight to my heart. The idea of being a grandmother, of having grandchildren who would grow up knowing and respecting my story, filled me with a happiness I hadn't felt in years. The day we signed the sale papers, I cried, not from sadness, but from a complex mix of nostalgia, pride, and hope. I was closing a beautiful chapter of my life to open an even more beautiful new one. That night, Raoul and Claudia took me to my favorite restaurant to celebrate. During dinner, Raoul handed me an envelope. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it," he said with a mysterious smile. Inside the envelope was a deed. But it wasn't the deed to the beach house. It was the deed to a small apartment in a new building near the city center. "I don't understand," I said, confused. "It's your new home," Claudia explained. "We bought it for you with part of the money we had saved for the beach house. But I didn't ask you for this," I protested. "We know," Raoul said, "but we want you to have a new place to start this new chapter of your life. A modern, comfortable place with no stairs to climb, close to everything you need. And close to us," Claudia added. It was such a generous, unexpected gift that I didn't know what to say. "Besides," Raoul said with a mischievous smile, "the building has a rooftop terrace with an ocean view. It's not the same as your beach house, but we thought you'd like to be able to see the ocean from your new home too." That night, as I drove back to my old house for the last time, I felt that my life was entering a completely new phase. A phase where I was respected, valued, and loved in the way I had always deserved. Today, 2 years after that phone call that changed everything, I am sitting on the terrace of my new apartment, watching the sunset over the sea while I have my afternoon coffee. At 68 years old, I can say with absolute certainty that these have been the fullest and happiest years of my life. My new home is perfect for this stage of my life. Modern, comfortable, with an elevator, and close to everything I need. But more than that, it is a symbol of what I have learned, that it is never too late to start over, to demand the respect you deserve, to build the life you truly want. Raoul and Claudia have transformed my old beach house into a beautiful home. They respected the essence of the place but added their own touch. The garden is full of flowers that Claudia planted with her own hands, something I never thought I would see that girl do. The one who arrived years ago with perfect nails and hands that had never touched soil. They kept their promise to invite me regularly. Every month, I spend a long weekend with them. We cook together, walk on the beach, and talk for hours on that terrace where everything began to change. But now the conversations are different. There is no tension, no words laden with double meanings, no awkward silences. There is genuine love, mutual respect, and the tranquility of a family that has learned to value itself. Claudia continued to grow professionally. After a year as an administrative assistant, she decided to study to become an accounting technician. Now she works at a small firm where they value her for her dedication and honesty. She recently won an Employee of the Month award, and she showed me the certificate with the same pride I used to feel when Raoul showed me his report cards from college. "You know what's most incredible?" she told me last weekend. "My parents finally decided to get to know me. Not the artificial version I was before, but the person I am now." "And how was that meeting?" I asked her. "Strange at first," she admitted. But when they saw me speak with passion about my work, when they saw how happy I am with Raoul, when they understood that I hadn't lost my class but had found my character, they began to respect my decision. "I'm glad to hear that," I told her sincerely. "Even my mother asked if you could teach her how to make tamales," she added, laughing. Apparently, after tasting the ones I made following your recipe, she decided she wanted to learn to cook real food. Raoul also continued to grow. He received a major promotion at his job, precisely because his bosses valued his authenticity and work ethic. He is no longer the insecure boy trying to hide his roots, but a man proud of his history and what he has achieved. "Sundays with you were the best thing I could have ever done," he confessed to me recently. "Not only did I get my mother back, but I got my identity back." Our Sunday dinners remain sacred. They are no longer therapy sessions like they were at the beginning, but simply quality time between mother and son. We talk about everything and nothing. We laugh. Sometimes we cry when we remember the difficult times, but we always end up grateful for the path we walked together. Last week, I received the most beautiful news of all. I'm going to be a grandmother. Claudia is 3 months pregnant, and when they told me, I cried from pure happiness. "We want you to know," Raoul told me, "that our child will grow up knowing their grandmother's full story. They will know about sacrifice, about hard work, about dignity, and about unconditional love. And they will learn to value things," Claudia added, "because we are going to raise them with the values you taught us." I have decided to write my story, not to publish it, but to leave it for my future grandchild. I want them to know exactly how we got here, what mistakes we made, what lessons we learned, and why it is important to never be ashamed of where you come from. In these pages, my grandchild will find the story of a woman who worked her whole life to give her son the best, who was deeply hurt by ingratitude, but who had the courage to demand respect and the wisdom to forgive when the remorse was genuine. They will also find the story of a son who lost his way, who traded his mother's unconditional love for the superficial approval of strangers, but who had the humility to recognize his mistake and the courage to do the work necessary to repair the damage. And they will find the story of a young woman who grew up with privileges but without values, who learned that true class comes not from money but from character, and who discovered that honest work and genuine love are worth more than all the jewels in the world. But more than anything, they will find the story of a family that broke and rebuilt itself, stronger than before, because it learned that true love does not mean accepting any treatment, but demanding the mutual respect that we all deserve. My neighbor Aline asked me recently if I regret being so tough on Raoul and Claudia when they disrespected me. "Never," I replied without hesitation. "It was the best thing I could have done for all of us." Why? Because I taught them that actions have consequences, that love is not unconditional when it comes to basic respect, and that it's never too late to change if you really want to. Now, as I watch the sunset lights reflect on the water, I think about everything I have learned in these years. I have learned that setting boundaries is not cruelty, but self-love. That forgiving does not mean forgetting, but choosing not to carry the weight of resentment. That people can truly change when they are willing to do the hard work of examining their own actions. But most of all, I have learned that you should never be ashamed of who you are or where you come from. Honest work, sacrifice for love, dedication to family, these are values that never go out of style. And anyone who makes you feel less for having those values simply does not deserve a place in your life. My phone rings. It's Raoul. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" "Very well, son. And you guys?" "Perfect. Do you mind if we come see you tomorrow?" "Claudia had a craving for your tamales, and apparently the baby does too." I laugh. "Of course. I'll expect you at 6. I love you, Mom. And I love you, son." I hang up the phone and smile. Tomorrow my son and his wife will come to my house, not because they need something from me, but because they want to be with me. They will come to eat the food I cook with love, to tell me about their lives, to include me in their future plans. The sun has completely set now, and the first stars are beginning to appear in the sky. I get up from my chair, pick up my empty coffee cup, and go inside my home. Tomorrow will be another beautiful day, full of love, respect, and dignity, exactly as it should be. And if my story helps someone else understand that it is never too late to demand the respect you deserve, then every tear, every difficult moment, every painful decision will have been completely worth it. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve to be loved and respected for who we truly are, and we should never settle for less.